All right, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the limitations of this system and improvements I'd like to make to it if I was to keep it. It really would do better with a trench here, a steel sides on both sides, so it'd become a trough that the log would sit in, because as you saw now, sometimes the log either gets crooked and you got to fix it by hand, or if the ramp's too steep and it comes down, it can bounce and come back. So what I'd like to do is have sides on it. The reason I can't do it with the current system is I built this log lift early on. It was one of the first things, and so I'm kind of stuck with the height of it, and the way everything else is set up right now, I wouldn't have room for the sides. The log would have to lift up and dump in at like this level in order to go in. So what my eventual plans was to build a log accumulation table that would then sit up here. You just stack all your logs up across it, have a lever hydraulic motor that advances a log in, and they just fall into the trough, and then the sides would hold it well. And these plates on this double 80 size chain work real well to advance the log. It's got plenty of power and grip, so that's not an issue. These 4x4 frames are 1/4 inch steel, very, very heavy. They're not going to bend. I mean, it can support as much weight as I'd want to put on it. So another option, if you were going to put it in a fixed location, which I thought about doing, putting it outside, is bury this I-beam, the I-beam that the splitter is made on. It's about, 8 foot long or so, and just bury that down maybe 6 inches into the dirt, even a foot if you wanted, and then you can lower everything else. So, because again, this has to sit above, obviously, in order to cut the log and have it drop in. But then you could lower this, which is why I built these legs on 4x4s, thinking, well, I'll lower it down, and that does a couple things. One, you may then be able to get your log up over the sides, even with the existing system. Or the other advantage is it keeps you closer to the ground, which is a little more convenient. Right now I've had the platform. In my second version of this, I was at ground level, and I had the conveyor go down onto a ramp where it would slide the log down into the trough for the splitting. The problem with that is sometimes the log wouldn't roll correctly. Now I'd say maybe 8 out of 10 times when you cut the log, it drops right in and requires no adjustment. And if it does require adjustment, you're standing right here on the platform, so it's very easy to just move the log as needed to line it up. The next thing I would do, which I started doing, is building a cylinder to raise this up and down, raise the splitter up and down. It does float. It takes a fair amount of force. I can't do it with one hand, but it does float on this post, and as the wood goes through it, it rises or falls to follow the grain of the wood. It has to be able to float. If it's fixed, you're going to bind the wood in it, which was one of my first versions of this. So it has to be able to float. Well, then I put a cylinder. I used a linear actuator, which is electric, to raise this up and down. Had it attached up here on this post and went up, and then would raise this up and down as needed. The problem is the linear actuator doesn't have a float feature. So now the wedge could no longer float, and once you get a heavy log in there that starts bending it, it just busted right off here at that flange. And so I'm thinking either using a pneumatic cylinder, which I have already, and just using relatively low air pressure, and then the air pressure could compress and expand in order to provide some float to it, or use a hydraulic cylinder with a float valve to allow it to move up and down with the wedge as needed. So that would be something I would do if I was going to keep it, because it would be handy to be able to adjust the height of the splitting wedge so that you don't have to send the large pieces back through again and split them again. The other thing that's missing, which is probably the highest priority as far as I'm concerned, is a hold down arm. As you saw with this last piece, once you get 3-4 foot log, it's very difficult to hold and cut, and it tends to want to fall off. So I built a hold down arm. That's the arm, very heavy 4-inch steel, solid 1-inch thick, and I've got all the materials for it. The cylinder is over there. It's a brand new 16-inch hydraulic cylinder. It will mount in between here, extend out here, and then have an offset arm going across, mount the pivot point of the arm here, and so it will basically rotate along the pivot point to come down and grab the log. The way I designed this is when it's in the complete open position, it's 30 inches high up above here, so any log can pass under it. In the closed position, it can hold anything from a 24-inch log down to a 10-inch log, based on the bends in the system and where it contacts the log. So I think that'll work real well. I just haven't had a chance yet to install that. The other thing that I thought about doing, which I would do if I was going to make it into a production machine where I was, commercially producing firewood, would be to change out this valve and put in an auto cycling valve. This one you have to hold it up while it's splitting, and then when you're done, you press it down and it's a dedent lock. So it returns by itself and then it pops up once it stops. But they have two lever valves like this that they call auto cycle. So you push both levers down when you start the cycle. It advances automatically to the end. Once it hits here, it pops one lever up, the other one retracts all the way back again, then it pops the second one up. So basically you hit it once and it's going to cycle through the splitting process while you're cutting or whatever else you're doing, advancing the log, lifting the log, whatever. So those are the biggest changes I would make. I priced it the way I did because it doesn't have those. If you look commercially for a system that has all those features I just talked about, you're looking at 30 grand in that range to handle something as heavy duty as this that can handle a 24-inch log. So trying to keep it economical, and again, I was just using it for my own good, for my own production, so it really didn't bother me if I had to took a little longer to process it. So anyhow, that is the features of it and the things I would change.